All right, so you sent over some fascinating research on emotional intelligence, specifically for compliance.
Hmm.
And we've got this podcast episode here that's kind of aimed at compliance officers.
Okay.
And I was a little surprised, honestly, by how important emotional intelligence seems to be
Yeah.
for, folks who are navigating rules and regulations.
Right.
I mean, you would think it'd be all about knowing the rules inside and out.
Yeah, you would think so. But, what this research is showing is that to be a really great compliance officer, you actually need more than just a, like, by-the-book approach.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this podcast that we're looking at, it lays out these 5 core components of what they're calling emotional intelligence, or EI.
Yeah.
And it's self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it seems like those are valuable qualities for anyone, not just someone in compliance.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think if you think about the kinds of challenges a compliance officer has to deal with on a day-to-day basis, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about really sensitive situations, investigations, having to deliver bad news.
Uh-huh.
So being able to navigate all of that, effectively really requires you to build trust with people,
Yeah.
understand different perspectives,
Right.
often in environments that are, emotionally charged.
Totally.
So that's, really where this emotional intelligence piece comes in.
So it's almost like it's not just about knowing the rules, it's like understanding the people and how they react to those rules.
Right.
This podcast kept emphasizing that trust is like the cornerstone of any really effective compliance program.
Yes.
So how does emotional intelligence actually lead to that? Like, how does it build that trust?
So think about it this way. A compliance officer, that's a role where you sometimes have to deliver bad news.
Yeah, I would imagine.
So imagine you're a compliance officer. You have to tell an employee they violated a policy. If you go about it from a very, factual, by-the-book standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
you might end up triggering some defensiveness in them.
Yeah.
Resentment even.
Makes sense.
Especially if the employee feels like they're just being treated like a number or a case file.
Right, like not like a human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now imagine if you approach that same situation, but with empathy.
Oh, okay.
You acknowledge their perspective. You even say something like, I understand this is probably difficult to hear, or something
Right.
that can make a huge difference.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's about recognizing that it's a human on the other end of this.
Okay. Yes, exactly.
Not just a broken rule.
Exactly. And when someone feels like they've been heard, that you understand them, even when it's something difficult,
Right.
they're more likely to trust you.
Yeah.
Believe that you're trying to do the right thing, get to a fair outcome.
Totally. So it's like, even if the news is bad, the way that you deliver it can really impact how it's received.
100%.
That's a really good example.
Yeah.
It makes you think about, even in our own lives, how often we maybe don't do that.
Right. Absolutely.
Especially in a field like compliance that is so focused on like the rules and procedures.
Mm-hmm.
This podcast also mentioned how emotional intelligence is a big part of decision-making for these compliance officers.
Yes.
And I'm curious about that because I imagine, there's a lot of gray area in compliance work, right?
For sure.
It's not always black and white.
A lot of gray area.
Yeah. So how does emotional intelligence help them when they have to make those tough calls?
Well, one of the key components we talked about of EI is self-awareness.
Yeah.
And being self-aware means you're able to kind of recognize your own emotional state
Mm-hmm.
and then think about how that might be affecting the decisions you're making.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, imagine a compliance officer is looking into a potential violation.
Right.
And they're getting a lot of pressure from management to, like, hurry it up and wrap things up.
Yeah.
I can see how that could be tough.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. If they're not self-aware, if they don't realize what's happening,
Right.
they might rush the investigation, overlook something important, or maybe even, let their own biases influence things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if they can take a step back and say, okay, I'm feeling this pressure,
Right.
I need to kind of consciously set that aside,
Uh-huh.
then they're much more likely to make a decision that's, fair and impartial.
So it's like the self-awareness helps protect them in a way
In a way,
from making a bad decision.
yeah, helps them stay objective even when things are really intense.
I like that. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah,
But what about those times when, you can't just set your emotions aside?
right.
Like if you have to confront someone about a violation,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're dealing with like a conflict between employees.
Right. That's where that self-regulation comes in.
Okay.
So it's the ability to manage your emotions even when things are really tough. Being able to stay calm when everyone else is losing it.
Right, right.
Control those impulses
Uh-huh.
and not react in a way that's just going to make things worse.
So almost like de-escalating
Exactly.
by
Exactly.
not matching their energy.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. You're a compliance officer. You have to confront someone about a serious violation.
Right.
If you go in there angry or frustrated, you're probably just going to get a defensive response,
Yeah.
hostile, even.
It's gonna make things worse.
Yeah, exactly. But if you stay calm,
Right.
composed,
Yeah.
you're much more likely to have a conversation that's productive,
Totally.
and then you can actually reach some kind of resolution.
That's interesting. So it's like by staying calm, you're almost modeling the behavior you want to see from the other person, right?
Yes, exactly.
And that in turn creates the space for them to maybe calm down.
Right. You de-escalate the whole situation,
Uh-huh.
and then you create an environment where people can actually talk about the issues and figure things out.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because we think about compliance as being, like I said, so black and white.
Yeah, totally.
But it seems like there's actually a lot of nuance there.
Oh,
A
absolutely.
lot of like dealing with people.
For sure.
Yeah, and their emotions.
Exactly. And that's why this emotional intelligence is so important.
Okay.
It's like the bridge between the rules and the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really the key to building that culture of compliance,
Right.
where people feel respected, they feel supported,
Right.
and they feel like they can actually do the right thing.
Yeah, it's creating the right environment.
Exactly.
And it seems like it's all built on that foundation of trust and understanding.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Which comes from these things like empathy and self-awareness.
Exactly.
Okay, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Before we go any further though, I want to talk a little more about this idea of social skills.
Okay.
Because it's highlighted in this research
Right.
as one of the core components of EI. And it seems really crucial for this compliance work, especially when you're dealing with, all these interpersonal situations that we've been talking about.
That's essential.
But we're not just talking about like being a people person.
No,
Yeah.
it's deeper than that.
Yeah.
It's really about understanding how social dynamics work,
Okay.
picking up on those nonverbal cues,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to communicate effectively, even when things are getting, really emotionally charged.
Right.
It's tough.
Yeah. So it's like a combination of the empathy and self-awareness and those good communication skills.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Okay.
Yeah, so imagine, for example, a compliance officer has to mediate a conflict between two employees,
Okay.
but they have very different communication styles.
Right.
One's very direct and assertive, the other's more passive,
Right.
avoids conflict.
Yeah, I could see how that would be tricky.
That's a recipe for disaster, yeah. Misunderstanding.
Yeah, lots of frustration.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But a compliance officer who's got those strong social skills,
Yeah.
they'd be able to recognize that,
Uh-huh.
see those differences, and then adjust their approach based on who they're talking to.
Okay.
So they might be more direct with the assertive employee,
Right.
but then more patient and empathetic with the one who's avoiding conflict.
So it's like, meeting them where they are,
Exactly.
understanding their style,
Yeah.
and then tailoring your communication to build that rapport.
Yes. It's all about connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that makes all the difference when you're trying to build trust and resolve these conflicts.
And it also encourages people to speak up, right?
Absolutely.
When they feel like they're understood.
Yeah, you're creating a space where they feel safe to share,
Yeah.
even if it's something difficult.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and, this episode, it goes on to talk about how all this plays into the overall culture of compliance in an organization,
Yeah.
which is a really fascinating discussion, but I think we've covered a lot of ground already today.
Yeah, we have.
So maybe it's a good time to take a little break.
Okay.
Let our listeners digest all this.
Yeah.
And then we'll pick up the conversation in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
All right.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. Okay, so we've been talking about how important emotional intelligence is for compliance officers
Right.
on an individual level,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
But this research they're looking at, it also talks about how EI can influence a whole organization's culture,
Right.
especially when it comes to compliance.
Okay. Yeah, that's something I was thinking about
Yeah.
because, we talked about trust.
Right.
We talked about communication.
Yeah.
But how do those things actually translate into like a company-wide culture
Okay, yeah, good question.
where people are really prioritizing, ethical behavior?
Right. So imagine two companies.
Okay.
Both of them have these really comprehensive compliance programs,
Hmm.
right? But in company A, the leadership, they just see compliance as checking boxes.
Okay.
Here are the rules, follow them.
Yeah.
No questions asked.
Right.
But then in company B, they really prioritize emotional intelligence.
Correct.
They encourage people to speak up. They listen to concerns.
Yeah.
And they actually model that ethical behavior themselves.
Okay, so right away, I can see how those two environments would feel very different.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Night and day.
Yeah, it's like in Company B, compliance is just part of how they do things.
Exactly.
It's not just a set of rules from the top.
It's ingrained in the culture.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think in that kind of company, with those leaders,
Right.
employees are more likely to see compliance as everyone's responsibility.
Yeah.
Not just something the compliance officer has to worry about.
Totally.
They feel comfortable speaking up.
Yeah.
They know they'll be taken seriously.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's like this shared accountability.
Right.
Everyone's invested in doing the right thing.
Right, so that's a big cultural shift.
Huge, yeah.
But how do you actually get there?
Right.
Like how do you cultivate that kind of environment?
Well, this podcast, it actually has some really interesting examples.
Right.
And one that stuck with me was about this employee who noticed something.
Mm-hmm.
They thought it might be a compliance violation,
Right.
but they were really hesitant to actually report it.
I can see why.
Right. Because they're worried about, causing trouble,
Okay.
getting someone in trouble, maybe even retaliation.
Right, that's a tough spot.
It is, especially if you know you should report it.
Yeah.
So now imagine two different compliance officers.
Okay.
The first one, not so much on the emotional intelligence, right?
Okay.
They just point to the rule book and say, look, this is the policy. You got to report this.
Right, yeah.
Very black and white.
That's pretty intimidating.
Yeah. Especially for someone who's already nervous.
Yeah.
It just feels like you're being accused.
Right, like you're already in trouble.
Exactly. It's like a compliance is just blind obedience,
Right. Right.
No room for the human element.
He did that,
But
yeah.
now imagine a different compliance officer,
Okay.
one with high EI.
Okay.
They take the time to listen,
Yeah.
acknowledge those fears.
Yeah. Right.
Hey, I understand why you're hesitant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Create a safe space for them to talk,
Well,
even if it's complicated.
okay, so that's a totally different experience for the employee.
Absolutely.
Right.
It feels supportive.
Yeah.
It encourages that open communication.
Right.
It's like, hey, compliance is about doing the right thing,
Yeah.
even when it's hard.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And that approach,
Uh,
if you do that consistently,
right.
it
Yeah.
shapes that culture
Yeah.
where compliance is everyone's responsibility.
Right.
People feel empowered to speak up,
Yeah.
and ethical behavior becomes the norm.
Okay. I'm starting to see how powerful this can be.
It's huge. Yeah.
It really is. Even in fields like this, where it seems like it should just be about the rules.
Uh-huh. We miss that emotional piece.
We do, yeah.
And it makes a big difference.
This podcast, it mentions that, compliance officers with high EI,
Right.
they're better at all these things, building trust, having those difficult conversations, resolving conflicts, shaping that positive culture.
Yeah. And those are the things that lead to good outcomes for everyone.
Exactly. It's not just about the individual.
It affects the whole organization.
Yeah.
Everyone benefits.
Right. So we've been talking about the impact on the organization.
Yeah.
But I want to talk a little bit about motivation
Okay.
as it relates to emotional intelligence.
Right.
Specifically in compliance.
Yeah.
Okay. So it seems obvious, but what does it actually mean for a compliance officer to be motivated?
Right. That's a good question because motivation, when we're talking about EI,
Uh-huh.
it goes beyond just, wanting to do a good job.
Right.
It's about understanding your own values
That's-
and making sure your work aligns with them.
So for a compliance officer,
Yeah.
it's like having that personal commitment to ethics and integrity.
Exactly. It's not just going through the motions
Right.
or enforcing rules because it's your job.
Yeah.
It's that genuine desire to make sure the organization is doing things the right way.
Right. So that's what drives them,
Yes, it's that internal compass.
even when things get tough.
Exactly. And that kind of motivation,
Uh-huh.
it's contagious.
Really?
Yeah, when someone is truly passionate about those things, ethics, integrity,
Yeah.
it inspires other people,
Wow.
creates this ripple effect.
That's a cool image.
Yeah, so this podcast had some real-world examples of this.
Okay.
For instance, they talk about how a motivated compliance officer
Uh-huh.
might go above and beyond just enforcing rules.
Okay, I'm curious. How do they do that?
So instead of just waiting for something to go wrong and then reacting,
Right.
they might actually try to identify potential risk areas
Okay.
proactively, and then come up with creative solutions
Oh.
to prevent those violations from happening in the first place.
So they're not just like putting out fires, they're preventing them.
Right. They're playing offense, not just defense.
I like that. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And that approach,
Uh-huh.
It's super effective
Right.
because it shows everyone that the organization takes ethics seriously,
Yeah, yeah.
and it empowers employees to actually take ownership of their own behavior.
Okay, this is really changing how I think about compliance officers.
Yeah, it's not just about the rules.
Right, they're like cultural architects.
Exactly.
That's a good way to put it.
Shaping the whole ethical landscape of the organization.
That's really powerful.
It is, and that's why emotional intelligence is so crucial for them.
Right.
It's the foundation for that kind of leadership.
So it's all connected, right? The motivations,
Mhm.
self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, social skills
It all works together.
to create this really well-rounded compliance officer.
Exactly. All driven by that desire to do the right thing.
Right.
And build that ethical culture.
Okay, this research is so interesting.
It is. It's really thought-provoking.
Yeah, because it's not just about ticking boxes, right?
Yeah.
It's about understanding people
Yeah.
and using that to create a better workplace.
A more ethical workplace.
I'm really inspired by this.
Yeah, me too.
You know, it's opened my eyes to how important emotional intelligence is.
Absolutely.
Not just in compliance, but everywhere,
It's everywhere, yeah.
in life and work.
And I think this conversation has highlighted some really key takeaways for anyone listening,
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence, it's not just a nice thing to have, it's essential
Right.
if you want to navigate the complexity of today's workplace
Yeah.
and create a work environment that's more ethical and more fulfilling.
Okay, but before we move on,
Yeah.
I want to circle back to this idea of well-being,
Okay.
because the research also touches on that.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
important.
Right. Especially for people in these demanding roles, like compliance.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the benefits for the organization,
Right.
but we can't forget about the individual.
Exact.
Compliance work, it can be super stressful.
Oh, yeah, I
They're
imagine.
dealing with sensitive situations,
Mm-hmm.
conflict, pressure from all sides.
So how does EI help them deal with that stress?
Well, first of all, self-awareness.
Right.
It allows them to recognize when they're getting stressed or overwhelmed.
Okay.
They can identify those triggers
Uh-huh.
and come up with strategies to manage it.
So instead of just like pushing through it,
Exactly.
burning out.
Yeah, they can step back,
Right.
take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And then self-regulation helps them control those impulses,
Okay.
manage those reactions,
Right.
not take things personally,
Yeah.
which is really important when you're in those high-pressure situations.
Right. So it makes them not only more effective,
Yeah.
but it makes the work more sustainable.
Is it?
They're not sacrificing their own well-being.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance.
Right.
And then empathy plays a big role too.
Okay. How so?
Well, when you understand other people's perspectives,
Yeah.
you don't take things so personally.
Right. It's not about you.
Exactly. You can see things from different angles
Uh-huh.
and find solutions that work for everyone.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And then social skills, like we talked about.
Right.
It's all about building those relationships,
Yeah.
communicating well,
Uh-huh.
navigating those social dynamics,
Right.
which helps you create that support network,
Right.
that sense of belonging.
And that's important for everyone.
It is. It's essential.
Yeah. It's amazing how it all works together,
It is, yeah.
to create this positive, more resilient experience.
Right.
Not just at work, but in life too.
It affects everything.
This has been so insightful.
Yeah, me too.
Really, it's made me realize that emotional intelligence is
Yeah.
not just a nice thing to have.
No.
It's really crucial for navigating, all the challenges that we face
Absolutely.
at work and in life.
It's a tool that we can all use.
Yeah, and I think it's a good reminder
Yeah.
that emotions have a place in the workplace.
They do, yeah.
It's not about being like overly emotional,
Right.
but it's about recognizing that they're there
Yeah.
and learning how to manage them.
So we can make better decisions,
Exactly.
build stronger relationships,
Yeah.
create a more positive environment.
Okay, I love that.
It's about harnessing that power,
Uh-huh.
not suppressing it.
That's a good distinction.
Yeah, bringing our whole selves to work.
I love that, a human-centered workplace.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that even in these fields like compliance,
Right.
where it seems so black and white.
There's always that human element.
Yeah, and by acknowledging it,
Right.
we can create a better experience for everyone.
A more just experience.
Yeah. Okay, I think this is a good place to maybe wrap up part 2 of our deep dive.
That's good.
But before we do, I'd love to hear, what you think our listeners should take away from all of this.
Oh, that's a good question.
What's the one thing you hope they remember?
I think the most important thing to remember is that emotional intelligence, it's a skill.
Okay.
It's not a trait.
That's an important distinction.
Yeah, it's something you can develop.
So we're not stuck
No, not at all.
at whatever level we're at.
Right, you can learn it.
You can get better.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah, and the benefits are huge. you know?
Yeah.
Better communication,
Uh-huh.
stronger relationships,
Less stress.
less stress, better decision-making,
Yeah.
increased resilience.
Okay. It's a pretty good list.
It is. It's worth the effort.
But I know change can be hard.
Oh, it definitely can be.
So do you have any advice for our listener on how to actually get started?
Yeah, I think one of the simplest things you can do is just start paying attention to your emotions.
Okay.
Throughout the day, notice how you're feeling and why.
Yeah.
What triggers you? What makes you happy? What makes you frustrated?
So it's about that awareness,
Exactly, that internal awareness.
like mindfulness.
Yeah, like mindfulness, but for your emotions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And once you start to see those patterns,
Uh-huh.
then you can start trying different ways to manage them.
So it's like, if I realize I get stressed when this happens,
Yeah.
I can try taking a break.
Take a break, deep breaths.
Or, really listening when someone's upset.
Active listening. Yeah.
Yeah, those are all good.
Yeah, and it's a process.
Right.
It's not something that happens overnight.
Right. It takes
You're
time.
going to mess up, you know.
Right. You'll have moments.
React in ways you wish you hadn't.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Right.
The key is to be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Learn from it. Keep practicing.
It's like learning anything new.
It is, exactly.
It takes practice.
Practice makes progress.
Okay. I love that. Practice makes progress.
Yeah. And eventually, it just becomes who you are.
It becomes a habit.
Exactly. It's how you interact with the world.
Okay. This has been amazing.
It's been really good. Yeah.
Seriously, it's really shifted my perspective
I'm glad to hear that.
on how important emotional intelligence is.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's not just a nice thing to have.
No,
It's crucial for everything.
it is. And I think, this research, it's a reminder that these skills, they're essential for navigating this complex world,
Yeah.
building those meaningful relationships, and creating a life that's more fulfilling.
Okay, and more ethical.
And ethical, yes.
All right, well, on that note,
Yeah.
I think it's time to wrap up part 2
Okay.
of our deep dive.
Sound good.
But we will be back for part 3,
We will.
where we'll dive even deeper into this topic.
I'm looking forward to it.
As we've been talking about all this, I've been thinking about how this research really challenges what we think of as success,
Yeah.
especially in a field like compliance. It's not just about being an expert or knowing all the rules. It's about these softer skills,
Yes.
These emotional intelligence skills.
Those human skills.
Yeah, where you can connect with people and build trust and just handle those tricky situations well.
Yeah. It's a good point. It makes me think about, how the workplace in general is changing.
Right.
Emotional intelligence is becoming so important for success.
Yeah.
And not just in fields where you might expect it.
Right. Like HR or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's everywhere.
It really is.
In today's world, you have to be able to work with people, communicate your ideas, and, deal with those conflicts that come up.
Right. All the time.
Yeah. And this research is saying that those skills really come from emotional intelligence.
Yes, absolutely.
Being able to understand and manage your own emotions, empathize with others, build those relationships,
Yeah.
communicate well,
Those are the things that will make you successful and happy in your career.
no matter what you do.
I think so.
Yeah, it's like emotional intelligence is what lets all those other skills actually work.
I like that. Yeah, the foundation.
Yeah, it's how you navigate all the ups and downs and the people and
It's
everything.
like the fertile ground, right?
Yeah.
Where all those other skills can grow.
This has been an amazing conversation.
Me too.
It's really made me see emotional intelligence as like a superpower.
It is.
It's how we reach our full potential.
At work and in life.
Totally. So I want to give our listeners some concrete steps they can take
Okay, yeah.
to start building their own emotional intelligence.
All right.
So what would you say is a good first step?
Well, like we talked about before, just start paying attention to your emotions.
Okay.
Notice how you react to things.
Uh-huh.
What stresses you out? What makes you happy? What are your triggers?
So it's being aware of what's going on inside.
Exactly. That self-awareness is key.
It's like a mindfulness practice.
It is, yeah, but for your emotions.
And then once you know what those patterns are, you can find ways to manage them better.
Yeah, so if you realize you get stressed out when you have to give presentations,
Uh-huh.
maybe you start practicing deep breathing exercises.
All right. Or if you tend to get defensive in arguments.
You could try practicing active listening.
Okay, so it's about finding what works for you.
Exactly. And remembering that it takes time.
It's a journey.
It
It's
is.
not a destination.
There will be times when you mess up,
Oh, for sure.
when you let your emotions get the best of you.
It happens.
The important thing is to be kind to yourself.
Right. Don't beat yourself up.
Learn from it.
and keep practicing.
Exactly. Practice makes progress.
I love that. Practice makes progress.
It really does. And the more you practice these skills,
Yeah.
the more natural they become.
Like any skill,
Right, like learning to play an instrument or a sport.
it becomes a part of who you are.
It does.
This has been such a transformative conversation for me.
Me too.
It's changed how I think about emotional intelligence. It's not just for certain fields or certain people.
Right. It's for everyone.
It's for all of us to help us navigate life
And build those strong connections.
and create a better world.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with me today.
It was my pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into emotional intelligence,
We hope you learned something new.
and that you're feeling inspired to start your own journey of developing this amazing skill.
It's a journey worth taking.
And remember, practice makes progress.
Until next time.
Keep learning and keep growing.